I want to welcome you back to Motonisto, and today in particular I want to talk about universal Japanese motorcycles of the 1970s and early 1980s, which is what this particular motorcycle behind me is. A new project, and you'll probably see more episodes of it. But today in particular, I want to talk about the engine setup and the carburation, because in 1970s and early 80s they're all choked up by government regulations and fuel shortage and fuel quality. And for that reason, it wasn't just motorcycles that were affected; they were choked down by those regulations. It was all vehicles. Big old American V8 cars would make 150 horsepower. That's almost ridiculous, but they were all choked down in order to make both happy: the population that was buying them and the government. But the problem, what we'll be talking about today, is exactly the carburation setup. A universal Japanese motorcycle was consisting of a four-cylinder, four carburetors, and sort of boring, aesthetically boring. No art to look at basically, but they were reliable and they went the long distance, dependable. But they lacked in performance. Today, in particular, I want to talk about a aftermarket company that sells replacement carburetors, and I'll show you around on other bikes examples of those carburetors. An outfit in North Carolina called Murray's Carburetors, and what they do is take. Why don't I show you a little bit closer? This right here. You see the arrangement? I just don't know if you can count them, but there are four carburetors. Each carburetor dedicated to the cylinder it serves. Now the problem with that is, especially after you remove the air box, this has aftermarket air filters. Obviously, it came with an air box, of course, because the government asked the manufacturers to quiet everything down, not just exhaust but intake also. Without that air box, these carburetors, especially custom velocity carburetors, these require a perfection state of tune, and even then, here's the problem with the setup. This is number 4 cylinder on the side. If the intake valve on the number 4 cylinder closes, the flow through the carburetor stops at the intake valve, and then it has to wait until the intake valve opens again in order for it to start flowing. Fluids don't really like the stop and go. They don't. They rather be redirected, if you will. And here's another example of another, used to be a UJM, now it's one of my custom creations, but it's a Honda with a straight 4 cylinder. If you don't believe me, you can count the headers, but you'll notice it only has 2 carburetors, 2 carbs right there. And what makes them different is the intake manifold. The intake manifold is the magic of this whole setup. The carburetors in particular are nothing special. They're Mikuni racing carburetors, which means when they're in a perfect state of tune for wide open throttle, they will be running rich on the road under regular usage. But see this intake manifolds. In this case, we're looking at number 1 cylinder here and number 2 adjacent. When number 1 intake valve closes, number 2 cylinder opens. Therefore, the flow through the carburetor does not stop. It's merely redirected in the manifold to go to the cylinder that needs it. $700 from, I don't know, let me see if I can zoom in, Murray's Carbs. And there's a competitor out there doing the same setup, 2 carburetor feeding 4 cylinders, but their intake manifolds are not quite as nicely cast, and they're not quite as well made. But for $700 we'll get you the whole kit. Everything is a bolt-on kit basically, from the air filters, all the clamps, O-rings under the manifold, and the throttle cables. He even sends you a little bit of feeding tubes to fit in there. But yeah, $700, and I cannot tell you, this is the second time I'm using the setup, and I'm about to use it for a third time for the motorcycle, which is discussed 2 minutes ago. It is that good. I cannot put it into words. I don't have any numbers on a dyno, any specifics on the performance increase, but it is night and day. It is unbelievable. So there you have it. If you have a older, more classic UJM, there's a perfect example. Harley Davidson. This is a Harley Davidson engine. 2 cylinders, 1 carburetor. The carburetor is shared through a similar manifold by the 2 cylinders. And it's worked so well for Harley that Harley did it for decades, basically. There are only very few special models that run dedicated carbs per cylinder, and those don't quite work well for production. Even some friends of mine try to do das mod, and a single cylinder, a shared carburetor for 2 cylinders works very well. It works so well that I'll spend another $700 onto this new project of mine, which we'll be talking about later. It is well worth it, and if you're on the fence about making your bike faster and you don't know whether or not to do it, if you got the $700, spend it. It will put some smile on your face. And with that, we will come back with maybe about an episode about tearing this bike down and making a cool retro 1960s cafe racer out of it. And with that, bye-bye.